Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from her heart, sharing authentically with her students. On the podcast, you'll hear anatomy lessons, stories from teachers, interviews with others in the field, and a dose of personal growth, because having a strong, healthy mindset is such an important piece of being a confident teacher. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Bare Bones Yoga for daily videos. And you'll also see a new link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link, a literal vending machine for you to select how you best want to be supported as a teacher. There, you'll find links to the podcast, free resources, and other ways I can help you be the best teacher you can be. And don't forget, every single week, in addition to recording you a new episode of this show, I also teach yoga classes and free workshops specifically for yoga teachers. The only way to get your invite is to be on my mailing list. You can do that simply by going to my website, barebonesyoga.com, and down at the bottom, entering your email in the box. Here we go with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 304. I'm recording this on July 5th, 2024, and you will be hearing this on or after July 8th. It goes live July 8th, and if you're like me and you listen to your favorite podcasts the day they drop, you're listening on the 8th. Otherwise, at some point beyond that, you're a listener. So thank you so much for hitting play and listening today. So I've got a little bit of a different format going forward for the show. I'm going to start out with an anatomy lesson, and then a teaching skills lesson, and then a mindset lesson. So we're going to kind of chunk it out into those three things. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I've decided to split it up in this way. Over the past several weeks, I've been thinking about who am I best set up to help. And over the years, I've sort of been someone who is willing to help any yoga teacher, regardless of where they are in their journey. And I don't know if you've ever heard this from a marketing standpoint, and even just from a helping standpoint. When you say that you're going to help everybody, you end up helping almost nobody because it lacks specificity. And one of the things that's really powerful in all kinds of situations is when you know exactly what you're looking for and you find someone who can help you with that specific thing. Let's just talk about it in those terms for now. And the reason you know it's a match is because the person is speaking directly to you. And this is really powerful in today's world of me connecting with yoga teachers via right here on my podcast, on my Instagram, on my TikTok, through different things that I post. This idea of you reading or watching a video or coming to a workshop and thinking, she's speaking directly to me. And that's a really powerful way to connect. You know, we can sort of even think about this in terms of how we are as a teacher. If we're teaching our classes and we're saying, I'm a yoga teacher that can help everybody, that's not bad or wrong. It's just that the more specific you can be about the kind of person you are set up to help, the more specific you can be about the sequence you offer, the cues you offer, and it can create this ecosystem, this environment where you're going to really powerfully attract the kind of person who you are set up to help. And so over the past several weeks, I'll be honest with you, I've been kind of frustrated because I feel like a lot of my content isn't landing. I'm not having as many requests from people to get on the phone with me. I'm not getting as many DMs from people saying, hey, I've got a question. I'm just not hearing a lot from my audience. And this happens when you try to be somebody for everybody. And so over the past several weeks, I've been thinking about who am I best set up to help? And knowing that, of course, a lot of what I put out there is free. This podcast is free. My Instagram is free. So I can't control who listens to it. And it's not about controlling. It's more about if you are the kind of person that I am really interested in connecting with, then you're my priority. You're the person that I'm really set up best to help. And my content is specifically directed to you. And so I wanted to start out today's episode with a little bit of a description of who that is. I am best set up, and the things that I offer are best set up to help you. And I'll just describe the kind of person. A yoga teacher who is a registered yoga teacher with Yoga Alliance, meaning they have graduated from a 200-hour teacher training, meaning they are done. They have graduated. They have their graduation information. They've entered it into the Yoga Alliance website. They are a registered yoga teacher, and they are teaching at least one class a week. That is the high level description of who I am best set up to help, and how everything that I do is focused on helping that person. So now you might be thinking, well, why? Why is that the person? Why isn't it somebody in a 200-hour training right now? Why isn't it somebody who took a 200-hour training but isn't teaching right now, right? Like, why are you not set up to help those people? Well, like I said, I have a lot of stuff that's free, so I can help a lot of people. But the people I'm most specifically looking to help is the person I just described. Because once you have completed a 200-hour teacher training and you have registered with Yoga Alliance and you are teaching at least one class a week, you're in a different category of yoga teacher. You are in the category of yoga teacher type that is someone who is putting themselves out there every single week and teaching. And that comes with a whole bunch of other requirements. It means you have to show up and teach. And I'm talking about teaching for pay. I'm not talking about, I'm teaching my friends and family whenever we can get a class together. I'm not talking about that. There's nothing bad or wrong about that. That's great, but that's not what I'm talking about. Because there is a different level of requirement when you have to show up every single week. You're getting paid for it. Students are going to be there waiting for you to show up. And there is a certain level of pressure that comes with that. There's a certain level of pain that comes with that. There's a certain level of responsibility that comes with that. That does not come with, I teach my friends whenever we can get it together, or I took a 200-hour teacher training and for XYZ reason, I just decided not to teach. And the reason I'm focusing on that specific kind of person is because everything that I offer, free or paid, is specifically designed to ease that pressure, to make it easier for you to teach, to make teaching be less of a hassle and more of what you wanted it to be when you decided to take a teacher training, which is you wanted it to be fun. You wanted it to be a vehicle for you to share something that you love, to share something that can be helpful to people. But you're out there teaching and you're realizing, I don't think I really learned anatomy in my 200-hour, or it's hard for me to share cues, or it's taking me hours to build my sequences. Like, those are just some of the problems that yoga teachers have, and they'll only come up if you're teaching at least one class a week, and you'll have much more of a fire under you to fix those problems when you are teaching weekly. And that's why those are the kinds of people that I want to work with and that I'm best suited to help, because you have urgency. what I'm offering, what I talk about is way more relevant to you because you've got a need to fix problems, to put it into action, to be better, to up level. Like there's a real need for that when you're teaching on a weekly basis. So that's part one. Part two is I was thinking, along with specifying things more, how can I add more value? And I said to myself, well, I can add a certification program piece to the program I have, or I can add a certification piece or component to my existing program by increasing the amount of support that I give you if you enroll, and by increasing the not the demand, but the requirement, quite frankly, that you demonstrate that you're actually learning the things that I'm teaching in the program. And let me just take a quick moment here to talk about the difference between certification and registration, because people use the term certification really, really loosely. When you take a 200-hour teacher training from Yoga Alliance, that does not certify you. That registers you. Yoga Alliance is a registry. They are not a certification body. They don't have any processes and protocols in place to meet with teachers, to supervise teachers, to see what teachers are doing. This is why they specifically call themselves a registry, and why what you get when you take a 200-hour training is an RYS, a registered yoga teacher designation. It's basically their way of acknowledging that you took a training from a studio that sent in an agenda, and that agenda was checked to have all the components of what a 200-hour needs to have. And that's it. They don't ensure that the studio owner running that program is actually doing any of the things on the agenda. Of course, they hope that they are, but they depend on bad reviews. And I'm just telling you what they told me when I've called them multiple times over the years. They depend on people who take trainings that don't comply with what the trainings say they're going to do, or who don't provide quality, to report those studios to them so that they can then follow up. There's no boots on the ground. There's no oversight. And I'm not saying there should be. I'm just saying this is how it is. And so what that means is that Yoga Alliance basically says, we'll register you, but we can't certify you. And so this is where there's a little bit of interchanging of the words. Now, please hear me. I am not saying that the 200-hour training you took wasn't of a certain quality. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. This has nothing to do with, I'm not speaking to quality right now. I'm just speaking to languaging and process. And the reason I'm saying this is because I want you to be able to appreciate the difference between a certification and a registration. When you work with someone like me, who's going to oversee that you complete all the steps in my program and that you're implementing those things that you're learning with me the way they should be implemented, and you're demonstrating that you're learning under my watchful eye, I can vouch for you. And that vouching in terminology terms is certification. And so that's why when I offer now as part of my program a certification layer, it's basically me saying anybody that enrolls from July 1st, 2024 forward is going to, number one, need to be a yoga teacher who has completed a 200-hour training. They have registered with Yoga Alliance, because I talk to a lot of teachers who take online only trainings and they never finish them. And they say, oh yeah, I have a couple more weeks to do before I'm finished with it. So they're in the middle of it, and it just sort of goes on and on and on. And oftentimes they never complete it. So from July 1, 2024 forward, in order to enroll in my program, you will need to be registered with Yoga Alliance as an RYT, meaning you have completed a 200-hour teacher training program, and you must be teaching at least one class a week. That is the baseline requirement to enroll in my program. Once you're in my program, you will be, I don't want to say supervised by me, but you will have me as a support and a mentor for the entirety of the time you're in my program. And I will be making sure that you are completing the lessons, and I'm showing you how to implement what you're learning into your teaching so that you can get your money's worth. So you can provide clearer cues so that you can learn the anatomy, so that you can, I'm not going to give you the whole outline of the program right now. And so as a result of taking my program, you will have your certification in anatomy and teaching skills, and you will have earned up to 30 hours of CEUs, which FYI, if you haven't checked, 30 hours of CEUs is your requirement every 3 years. So that means just by taking my program, you can fulfill your entire every 3 years, well, your entire CEU requirement for the next 3 years. Like, that's almost unheard of from one program. So that's what it's going to look like going forward. You need to meet certain requirements to be able to enroll, and at the end of the program, you'll have your certification from me, and you will have up to 30 hours of CEUs that you can use towards your Yoga Alliance CEU requirement. So that is the overview that I wanted to start with. And from that, I decided that I'm really going to be shifting a lot of my content back to anatomy. You know, I've really gone into a lot of different topics of teaching over the years, and I'm going back to this anatomy piece because at the end of the day, understanding anatomy is by far and wide one of the most important, critical, fundamental pieces of being a successful, competent, confident yoga teacher. And it is by far the thing that I always hear about that teachers did not learn in their teacher training, their 200-hour training. So I've been filling that gap for years. This is why I have my program. This is why I don't have a 200 or a 300 or 500-hour program, because we don't need more of those. We don't need more of those kinds of programs. What I do with my program is I fill a gap in the industry. And because it's my expertise, anatomy, that's why I love to talk about it and I love to teach it. So with that, let's start with today's lesson. Today's lesson, anatomy lesson, is about the rotator cuff. And the reason I wanted to focus on this is because it's such a conversational term that people throw around. And I really want to be sure that you know, I don't want to say 100% what the rotator cuff is, because there's only so much we can cover here on the pod. But I want you to be able to have a good overview of the rotator cuff group, because your students are going to come to you and say, I have a rotator cuff tear, or my doctor says I have an injured rotator cuff. And I don't want you to be back on your heels thinking, I don't know what that is. And because so many people conversationally talk about the rotator cuff incorrectly, just like the glutes, they talk about it like it's just one part in the body, and it's not. The rotator cuff is comprised of 4 different muscles. So let's start there. The 4 different muscles of the rotator cuff are known by the acronym SITS, S-I-T-S. So you have the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the subscapularis. So I'll say that again. SITS, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. So now that you know the 4 muscles, let's review where they are and what they do. So the first one, the supraspinatus. If you take your right hand right now and put your right hand on the top of your left shoulder. So cross over the front of your body and take your first 2 fingers of your right hand and palpate right along, a little bit above your collarbone, right along the top ridge of your shoulder. So walk yourself from your carotid across with those 2 fingers palpating until you get to the edge of your shoulder. That, for the most part, is where your supraspinatus is. Now take your left arm, let it hang by your sides. Keep your first 2 fingers kind of pushing right above the clavicle there. You'll feel you're probably more feeling your traps, but this is where the muscle is. And then take your left arm and stick it out to the side like you're in Warrior One. So that's shoulder abduction, and you're palpating essentially where your supraspinatus is. It's responsible for shoulder abduction, and it starts in this little fossa, this little kind of caved in section right above the spine of the scapula. So now if you take your right hand and you go behind your left shoulder blade, I want you to feel for the spine of the scapula, which sticks out. You can feel it. And then go right above the spine of the scapula towards the top of the shoulder. That's essentially where the supraspinatus sits. And it runs in that little kind of fossa there over to the humerus. And when you take your arm out to the side, like in Warrior 2, that is shoulder abduction, and that's the function of the supraspinatus. So now let's go to the next one. Supraspinatus, the next one, infraspinatus. The infraspinatus sits, this is going to be harder to palpate, but it sits on the portion of the scapula. If you're looking at somebody from the back, the portion of the scapula that's below the spine. So if you take your right hand, you go underneath your armpit and you reach behind you for the scapula. If you go below the spine, that whole section there, it fits right in there and it connects over to the humerus. And if you take your left arm now, hang it by your side and spin your palm forward as if you were standing in mountain pose, that's external rotation of the shoulder. That's the function of the infraspinatus. Now, the neighboring muscle, or the next muscle in the acronym SIT, begins with T, teres minor. Teres minor, you're not really going to be able to palpate for it, but it runs in the same direction from the lower part of the scapula over to the humerus. And it does the same thing, external rotation of the shoulder. So that means the infraspinatus and the teres minor are synergists in the action of external rotation. Now, I want to just take a pause here and just note that most of us during the day are not doing a lot of external rotation. We're doing more of internal rotation. So these muscles tend to be weak in most people, these external rotators, which kind of begs the question, well, what does that mean for teaching? Well, it means we should be doing a lot of external rotation in our classes to give our students the movements that they're lacking during the day, just in their activities of daily living. And then the last muscle is the subscapularis. So if you take your right hand and you press right above, let's see, if you take your right hand and palpate the sternum, and then go lateral to the sternum. So if you're a woman, you're in the breast tissue area, right in that kind of where your pecs are. Now imagine if you were to excavate your pecs away, you would have access to the inside of the scapula. That's where the subscapularis sits. And now I want you to take your left arm and internally rotate your shoulder. So turn your palm to the back of the room. Pronate, not supinate, pronate. And so that is the function of the subscapularis. The subscapularis is on the inside of the shoulder blade, and it's responsible for internal rotation. So now you know that when somebody comes up to you and says, I have a torn rotator cuff, your next question should be, well, tell me a little bit about, do you know which muscle, or better yet, can you show me what movement was or is a problem for you? Like if they've had it repaired, it's probably not going to be a problem now, but if they're just going through physical therapy, they're not going to operate. You know, without getting into the details, what you want to do is, number one, know what the 4 rotator cuff muscles are in their function and placement. And number two, you want to ask your student, well, tell me what movement is challenging for you. Because when they tell you the movement, you're going to be better able to hone in on what muscle is really at issue. And again, we're not doing this because we're trying to have a physio evaluation with the person. We're just trying to have an understanding of what exactly is the limitation in movement they have so that we can give them appropriate modifications to do. So that's a quick review of the rotator cuff. Now, implications for teaching, like I said earlier, external rotation is key because people are just not getting a lot of that movement in their activities of daily living. Same thing with spinal extension, FYI. So think about anytime you're doing anything in your classes that involves external rotation of the shoulder, that's a great time to call that movement out to your students and start to speak about the benefits of external rotation, because you want them to start to recognize in their day, are there times that I'm doing external rotation, or start to get in their heads this idea that they want to take postural breaks throughout the day to do some of these movements. So one of the things I love to encourage people to do throughout the day is interlace the fingers behind the back and squeeze the shoulder blades together. You know, in that movement, they're going to get external rotation of the shoulders. They're also getting scapular adduction, but we're not talking about that right now. So they're going to get that external rotation, which the body typically is craving. So think about right now, what poses are you teaching in your classes where external rotation of the shoulders is involved? So you've got your up dog, you've got your dancers, you've got your bridge, you've got any variation where you interlace the fingers behind the back, you've got your siding, a lunge with the variation of the half bind or the double bind. You know, those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. There's definitely more. Plus, you can add variations intentionally, things like cactus arms in your warrior sequences, in your crescent lunge sequences, specifically to call out external rotation, maybe even speak to the musculature involved. I mean, the muscles that I just rattled off, people don't know about these muscles. So you're really going to be adding value to your students, to your classes for your students, if you can start to give them these muscle names, not as a way to like impress them, but to, as they're doing the pose, start to speak about the movement, the benefits of doing this movement, noticing throughout the day if there's opportunities for them to, like, this is part of adding value to your classes. This is part of being different from everybody else. This is part of standing out, of differentiating yourself. And again, I'm only speaking to that person that I talked about earlier. You're a 200-hour teacher training graduate, you're a registered yoga teacher, and you're teaching at least one class a week. Like, this conversation is for you, because you could go into your next class tomorrow and use this in your next class and up level. Like, that's all it takes. These little tiny stepping stones to being a better and more impactful teacher. So that's the piece on the rotator cuff. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. All right. So the next thing, let's now shift to a teaching skills lesson. And I want to talk a little bit about, you know, the application of some of what we just talked about to teaching. So let's say you listen to this episode, you uncover more about the rotator cuff, and you want to apply this to your teaching. So I already talked a little bit about how, so let's get into a little bit more specifics about how you could do that. So let's say you wanted to create a sequence where you could speak about external rotation of the shoulders and obviously give your students a chance to do this movement and understand more about that. So if you're going to create a sequence where you want that as the theme, you know, conversationally in yoga speak, this is what people would typically call a shoulder opening sequence. So one way that you could do this is you could craft a sequence with a peak pose with the theme of external rotation of the shoulders. And this would be a perfect way to take the anatomy lesson that we just went through, and now we're applying it to teaching. Because remember, like, if you're listening to this right now and I don't add an application piece to this, it's really a very little value to you. Like, if I stop talking right now, what will you have gained? You will have gained, yes, valuable knowledge, information about the rotator cuff, but I haven't given you a way to apply it other than those couple of things we talked about when we talked about a handful of poses and the postural implications. So this is really, like, this is one of the things that makes me different. I am always going to give you a way to apply what you are learning when you come to my workshops, listen to my podcasts, come to my anatomy workshops on Instagram. Like, that's one of the things that makes me different from other teachers where there's not application. where there's a lot of the academic part without the application, which is good, but it can be better. So if you're going to create this sequence with a peak pose, let's think about what's a good peak pose that has external rotation of the shoulders. Well, what if you picked side angle lunge with the full double bind? Of course, they could do it with a strap. They don't have to do it without a strap. Doing it with the strap means essentially it's modified, but it's not like it's really diluted because they're still doing the external rotation of the shoulders. Now, why would that be an eligible pose for the peak pose? Like you might be thinking, oh, side angle lunge with, double bind is not super challenging. Well, number one, it is super challenging. And number two, let's think about why it's super challenging in the context of what we just talked about. Because most of us are hunching a lot throughout the day, the external rotators are weak. And the external rotators are weak and overstretched, and the internal rotators are tight. These things happen when we have this sort of overuse pattern. And so what that means in the context of this pose is that when you have people come into your class and you want them to do side angle lunge to the half bind to the double bind, every variation addition you're doing as you're progressing this posture is asking for more from the shoulder in terms of external rotation, range of motion. And as people progress and they start to hit the wall, you're going to see internal rotation of the shoulder. And so you want them to be able to stay in healthy alignment so that they can get the most out of the movement. You don't want them to succumb to the compensation, which is, well, I can do the double bind with a strap, but if somebody's watching me, I really am an internal rotation. You don't want that. So this means that there's going to need to be, if you think about a peak pose as a bell curve, there's going to need to be sufficient warming up of the external rotators of the shoulder, again, teres minor and infraspinatus, on the upswing of the sequence, so that when you get to the peak pose of the double bind, and you could even do bird of paradise like that if you want to get even more challenging. Bird of paradise and side angle lunge with the double bind is essentially the same thing with respect to the shoulder. It's just that the bird of paradise variation adds the challenge of the balance. So that is, let's just be frank, that is going to be a harder variation or a harder pose for people. So you can decide what you want to do. But in either case, if we just sort of hone in on the shoulder, you're going to need to pick really intentionally in the upswing of your sequence enough for people to do to warm up those external rotators. So you're going to need to think about what are the poses I can front load in this sequence so that they're doing external rotation and warming up teres minor and infraspinatus so that when they get to side angle lunge or bird of paradise, they have a better shot at doing it. So that's a piece for applying anatomy, specifically the anatomy of the rotator cuff that we just talked about, to your teaching. And, I really want you to see here what's the difference. There's the academic learning part, and then there's the application part. And we just went through both. So let's shift now into lesson number 3 here in this episode. And this is going to be a mindset lesson. And it has to do with sharing your cues effectively, and an aspect of cueing that never gets talked about. Like I honestly have not heard anybody talk about this, but I know from talking to hundreds of yoga teachers, the thing that always comes up is I want to have more confidence. And so if we look at confidence specifically through the lens of your cueing, let's just look at it really narrowly, even though confidence, kind of permeates everything you do as a teacher. But let's just look at confidence just through the lens of you sharing cues. When you're a yoga teacher who lacks confidence and shares cues, they lack conviction. Conviction in this context means belief. And in the context of teaching means when I cue my students, my cues land on their bodies with conviction, with belief, with the impact of somebody saying something, the teacher sharing a cue, that they really can explain, that they really know what they're talking about, versus a teacher who's just repeating things that they were told to say. In fact, teachers will say to me, I'm using that cue because that's what I was trained to say. Again, I'm not judging, I'm not saying bad or wrong. In situations like that, the teacher is basically deferring judgment to the person that trained them. That's part of the natural dynamic of being mentored by someone. So again, this is just part of what happens. But to up level as a teacher, to be better, to give your cues and have them land on your student's body, you need to be able to share them with conviction, meaning you need to know what you are talking about, meaning you need to know what I call the why behind the cue. If you don't know the why behind the cue, you can't share your cues with conviction. It just is. It's basically just saying stuff. It's like la 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 la. It's like it just won't land on them. And your experience of sharing that cue will be way different. You know, it's like the difference between driving from point A to point B and using MapQuest versus driving from point A to point B and not using MapQuest because you've driven there 100 times and you know exactly how to get there. When you are teaching and sharing your cues of conviction, it's not magic. It comes from understanding what you are saying and why you are saying it. And because there's no universal format on sharing cues, you know, you can be saying whatever you want, but without the knowing, that's where the conviction comes from. And I talk about cueing. I've shared this on prior episodes. I talk about the qualities of amazing cues in a three-pronged format: clarity, conviction, and connection. They must be clear, meaning anybody can understand them regardless of their experience with yoga. They must be shared with conviction, which comes from understanding the why behind the cue, which we just talked about here at length. And they must be shared in a way that demonstrates connection between you and your student. And the way that you know your cues are connecting with your students is you say the cue and you see what they do. You don't say the cue and be practicing on your yoga mat, talking the cue to the floor. You don't say the cue and be up in your head like, oh my God, are they liking this class? You say the cue and you watch them. You look and see, are they getting it? Are they doing it? Are they doing what I just said? Because that is where the connection is or isn't. Now, if they're not getting it, is that on you? Partially, not entirely. So this is not about making you feel bad, doing right, wrong. This is just about how can I be the kind of yoga teacher who builds amazing connection with my students? Is connection just about sharing cues? Of course not. But 90% of what you're doing when you go in the room with people is going to be connecting through what you're saying. All right, maybe not 90%, but certainly 70%. Because the bulk of what you're doing, the two main things you have as a teacher is what you say and what you offer them. The cues and the sequence, the cues and the sequence. Now, there definitely are ancillary things, but I really want you to see that you have a huge opportunity here in what you're saying to be landing on your students. And part of what you want is to say and see and know by what you see that it's working. And if it's not working, you want to rephrase it. And if it doesn't work that second time, you want to move on. You don't want to harp on it, just move on. So 3 qualities of amazing cues: clarity, meaning they're clear; conviction, meaning you know what you're talking about; and connection, meaning you're looking at your students to make sure the cues are working. Say the cue and see what they do. So that brings us to the end of this episode. And I want to just wrap up with a couple of quick things. Number 1, I'm not sure if you know, but just about every weekday, I go live on Instagram and I do a workshop. Yes, an actual workshop that I could charge for, that you could come to on Zoom, that you could come to live and in person. But I just do it on Instagram because it's a really easy way to get connected with people in a place where they already are a lot, which is their phone. So I just want you to know, if you're not connected with me on IG, Bare Bones Yoga, and this information, this kind of knowledge, this kind of up leveling is important to you, if learning anatomy is important to you, you're going to want to connect with me there. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is I don't schedule when I'm going to go live on Instagram. I sort of do it when it works for me. So you won't necessarily know when I'm going live. If you happen to be on the phone when I'm going live, you'll get the alert if you're connected to me and you can hop on. But no worries, because all of the IG lives I do are recorded and you can always watch them on my page. So that's number one. Number two, have you gotten your copy of my free ebook? I released it 2 weeks ago. It's been downloaded by hundreds of teachers. It's called the Bare Bones Yoga Guide to Incredible Yoga Teaching. You can get it right on my Instagram. I have a link in my bio. I know you're on Instagram. I know you're on your phone. So I put it where I know you are anyway. So go on Instagram, Bare Bones Yoga, click the link in my bio, scroll a couple lines down, and you'll see free ebook. Now, there's also an audio version. It was the episode prior to this one, episode 303. But you're going to want the hard copy and you're going to want to print it out, because I made it with a bunch of exercises in it that I want you to write out answers to. I made it really interactive so that you get the most out of it. It's not like you're just going to sit on your seat and read this thing. You're going to be interacting with it so you really get value. It's got my best practices and protocols around cueing, sequencing, mindset, and anatomy. So that's number two. Number three, here we are. I'm recording this on July 5th. You're going to be hearing this on July 8th. We are in the summer of 2024. If you are a yoga teacher who has graduated from a 200-hour training, who is a registered yoga teacher with Yoga Alliance, and you are teaching at least one class a week, you are eligible to enroll in my program. And because we're in the summer, who wants to be studying during the summer? Nobody. So I am offering an accelerated program for the summer of 2024. And I'm giving any teacher who is a yes for enrolling in my program, which is less about my program and more about you being a yes for up leveling as a teacher, getting your certification in anatomy and teaching, earning those CEU hours, and being a better teacher. I'm going to give you a financial incentive to say yes. So if you are listening, if you meet the requirements to enroll and you want to make the most of this summer and also be in the accelerated certification program, just send me a DM on Instagram before the end of July. Before the end of July. Matter of fact, I'm even going to go so far as to say, as I look at the calendar here, before July 22nd. And just say accelerated summer program, and I'll send you the details. So that's the last thing. So that is it. Any questions, you can always send me a DM on Instagram. And if you've come here to this last part of the podcast, it means you listened all the way through it. I want to say thank you so much for your time. I hope you have an amazing week ahead, and I'll talk to you on the next episode of the show, Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Thank you so much, and namaste. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed it. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to work with me. She's ready to take action. She's looking for someone who has the answers she needs. She knows she's worth the investment. She can't wait to get all her prep time back. And she's excited to make a positive change. If that's you, DM me the words podcast offer to my Instagram, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside my signature program. My Instagram handle is Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.